The Forgotten Ones. Chapter 2. The Shadow's Warning. The door to Peter's apartment swung shut behind Ellis, the echo of its slamming shut reverberating through the empty halls. He stood in the center of the room, his breathing heavy, his heart pounding in his ears. The darkness that had crept into the corners of the room seemed alive now, clinging to every surface, shifting as if it had a will of its own. Ellis's mind was racing. The figure he had seen, standing in the shadows, faceless and silent. It wasn't just a trick of his imagination. He had felt it, that unmistakable presence that crawled under his skin, as real as the pounding rain outside. Whatever Peter had uncovered, whatever he had warned Ellis not to come looking for, was here. And now it knew Ellis was here too. He turned back to the desk, the papers scattered across it catching his eye. Peter's handwriting was frantic, scrawled across pages in barely legible lines, like he had been writing in a rush, desperate to get his thoughts down before something or someone stopped him. Ellis sifted through the pages, trying to make sense of the chaos. One line stood out circled over and over again in red ink. They come in the shadows. Don't let them see you. Ellis stared at the words, his mind trying to wrap itself around their meaning. The figure in the corner, the one that had vanished as quickly as it had appeared. It had come from the shadows. Could Peter have been talking about them? A chill ran through him as the realization sank in. Peter had been hunting ghosts, or at least something close enough to them. Things that existed in the corners of reality, in the forgotten spaces where people vanished, erased from the world. But why? And more importantly, how? Ellis gathered up the notes, folding them into his jacket pocket. Whatever Peter had been trying to uncover, Ellis would have to follow the trail himself. There was no turning back now. Not with that figure, that thing out there watching, waiting. He grabbed a flashlight from Peter's cluttered desk, flicking it on as he moved toward the apartment door. The beam cut through the gloom, casting long shadows across the floor. Ellis hesitated for a moment, his hand resting on the doorknob, before finally stepping out into the hallway. The building was eerily silent, as though it had been abandoned for years. The rain had let up, but the air was thick and damp, and the smell of mold and decay clung to everything. The dim lights flickered overhead, casting long, wavering shadows that danced across the walls. Ellis made his way down the narrow hallway, the flashlight bouncing with each step. The building had once been grand, maybe 100 years ago. Back when the city was alive, back when people still cared about it. Now, it was nothing but a husk, a forgotten relic, much like the people who had disappeared here. As he reached the stairwell, Ellis heard it. A faint whisper, like the wind passing through a crack in the wall. He froze, his pulse quickening. The whisper grew louder, more distinct, like a voice speaking just beyond the edge of hearing. Ellis shone his flashlight down the stairwell, the beam cutting through the shadows but revealing nothing. The whisper persisted, a voice just out of reach, like someone calling from another room. Too far to understand, but too close to ignore. He gripped the railing and began his descent, his footsteps echoing unnaturally in the confined space. As he moved deeper into the building, the whisper became clearer, a chorus of voices weaving together, overlapping in a way that made his skin crawl. Turn back. Ellis stopped dead in his tracks, his breath catching in his throat. He could hear it now, clear as day. A warning, spoken softly but filled with an urgency that chilled him to the core. Turn back. You're not supposed to be here. He swept the flashlight across the stairwell, but there was nothing. Just the empty space and the whispering voices, but they weren't coming from above or below. They seemed to be all around him, slipping through the cracks in the walls, rising from the very shadows themselves. Ellis swallowed hard and forced himself to keep moving. His grip tightened on the railing as he descended deeper, the air growing colder, heavier. The deeper he went, the more the shadows seemed to press in, thickening like smoke, swirling around his feet and creeping up the walls. The whispers followed him, growing louder with each step. "Leave! You shouldn't be here. They'll see you." Ellis reached the bottom of the stairwell and stepped out into the main lobby. The place was a wreck. Furniture overturned, the once polished floors now covered in dust and grime. The front doors, tall and heavy, were chained shut from the inside, as though someone had been trying to keep something out. Orion, was this the way I came in? He thought to himself. He moved cautiously across the room, his flashlight beam sweeping over old mailboxes and decaying wallpaper, and then he saw it. A large mirror, cracked and smeared with dust, standing in the corner of the room, half hidden by a tattered curtain. It was out of place, too grand for a building like this, its ornate frame standing in stark contrast to the decay around it. Ellis approached the mirror, his reflection distorted by the cracks. He hesitated, feeling a strange pull toward it, as though the mirror itself was drawing him in. He lifted his hand, fingers brushing against the cool, fractured glass, and then the reflection moved. Not Ellis. His reflection. For a split second, the figure in the mirror wasn't him at all. It was someone else. Someone faceless, with dark, hollow eyes, staring back at him with an unnatural stillness. Ellis stumbled back, his heart hammering in his chest. The flashlight slipped from his grasp and clattered to the floor, its beam flickering wildly as it spun. He scrambled to pick it up, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he pointed the light back at the mirror. But there was nothing. Just his own reflection, staring back at him, cracked and warped by the broken glass. He backed away slowly, his mind reeling. Had he imagined it? No, he was sure of what he had seen. The figure, the way it had just stood there, watching him from the other side. He hadn't imagined that. "They'll see you." The words echoed in his mind, louder now, more insistent. Whoever or whatever was in that mirror, it wasn't done with him. It had seen him. Ellis turned away from the mirror and bolted toward the door, his hands trembling as he fumbled with the chains. The whispers were growing louder again, swirling around him in a frantic chorus, warning him, begging him to leave. He didn't need to be told twice. As the last chain fell away, Ellis yanked the door open and stumbled out into the cold night air. The rain had returned, falling in heavy sheets, but he barely noticed. All he could think about was that thing in the mirror, the way it had watched him. He hurried down the street, his footsteps splashing through puddles, his breath coming in sharp bursts. He didn't stop until he was a few blocks away, the building shrinking behind him, swallowed by the night. But even then, Ellis couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed him, that somewhere in the dark, something was watching. "They come in the shadows," Peter had written. And now Ellis knew what that meant. In the silence of the rain, Ellis realized that some things can't be unseen and some places never let you go. If you've enjoyed this unsettling chapter of The Forgotten Ones, remember to like, subscribe, and share. The darkness grows, and the next chapter will reveal more of the chilling truth. Don't get lost in the forgotten. The stories may end, but the nightmares continue. Sleep soundly, if your mind lets you.